It's called Architects of the Future, Designing or Defining Simple Principles for Future Makers, aka Design and Make Like You Give a Shit, and that's from a manifesto principle that I recently contributed to the Open Making Manifesto for OpenDesk with the Vitry Museum. And we were asked to, I was asked to contribute something that was important for future makers. And hopefully we're going to kind of illustrate why, and then get to a set of simple principles that we can talk about, and we can talk about with people that are young makers. So we won't use complicated language, and that we can have something that's not a manifesto, because we don't want complicated ideology. What we want is easy ways to talk about things. So Architects of the Future comes from the Buckminster, or a quote from Buckminster Fuller from kind of his massive writing, which is that we're called upon to be architects of the future and not its victims. So a bit about me really quickly is that I trained as a cabinet maker, and I've been a maker since I was tiny. I mean, I've got a photograph of myself and my grandfather, who was an antique restorer, when I was 5 years old, hammering bits of wood. So for me, the kind of maker movement is interesting, but it's certainly in no way new. I mean, making has been part of my culture since I was born. The reason I'm showing these chairs is because this was kind of the first moment when I was thinking about making a sharing. So these are from some designs that I created, which I did specifically to share my thinking about how we need to think about making. So these are designed so that they're simple for people to understand, so that they can understand the use of tool making in making, the need to understand flexibility in making when you have limited skill sets, or when you're making things, to allow you to make mistakes where those mistakes aren't wholly detrimental. And also, these chairs were designed to utilize waste material, because I ran a cabinet making workshop for 6 years, and a lot of the material throughput meant we generated a lot of waste. So I was trying to combine a number of things. So basically the premise is, if I'm teaching someone to make, I want them to be good makers, and that means understand where material comes from and how to maximize its value. And that was, for me, I had to do that in my workshop, which is to design something that could utilize waste material. Certainly not the solution, but it's a kind of step in the right direction. So I now run a project. So I teach at the Royal College of Art, but I also run a 2-year research project called Future Makespaces. And they're called Makespaces because it didn't want it to be about makers. I wanted it to be about the potential of making in redistributed manufacturing. So this is a kind of potential new landscape of manufacturing which doesn't have centralized sites of production, but has a kind of more distributed approach. But I also teach with Thomas at the Royal College of Art, and we run a teaching platform in design products called Exploring Emergent Futures. We've defined it as a lab for rethinking how and what we design and make in light of what we now know and hope for. And that's not necessarily just about sustainability, it is about opportunities for new technology, cultural shifts. And in terms of the future is tomorrow into the far future. It depends on what the context you're thinking about, how far you want to rethink and how much you need to. So in order to talk about these principles, I want to talk through some things about the world. So the innovation of the shipping container in connection with changes in ships, ports, canals, has brought vast numbers of goods, components and materials from locations that they are harvested in, processed and fabricated into markets across the globe. These overlapped, interlaced and crisscrossing networks have brought much needed and desired goods at affordable prices to a massive audience. This results in a vast array of goods on offer to consumers. Competing products that originate from wholly different places are wrapped and packaged in other materials to survive the journey, as well as acting as message carriers to help shout above the noise of competing goods from elsewhere. This global scale of distribution and consumption can fuel the desire of some people and businesses to industrialize and rationalize all manner of things, This leads to distortions like this farm in the US, where cattle farming no longer resembles anything like husbandry, but rather something autonomous and calculating. The rationalizing of production leads to factories that are places where robots work, performing optimized, choreographed actions, turning materials into products more accurately, more quickly, without human need for break, food, or interaction. We have cities that are created as factories to meet the demands of hungry global supply chains, where their inhabitants are rationalized to perform repetitive tasks, interacting and being optimized like robots. This global mishmash of production origins, materials, and the needs to package goods in transit leaves us with things we know little about and things we don't know what to do with. The cost of this system is paid individually, socially, culturally, economically, as well as environmentally. So this is why I'm interested in make spaces. There is a potential for rethinking how, where, and what we make. So these, jumping to 3D printed things, but these 3D printed objects and their accompanying software is targeted specifically at kids. It brings Minecraft and play into the world of designing 3D objects. Our kids will be familiar with design tools and digital manufacturing. The notion that they can make things and their choices will result in things that they can make themselves or had made for them will be incredibly normal. So this could lead to greater engagements with businesses. Similar to this is Local Motors Factory, where people who want to buy vehicles can actually go in and be active parts of the making process, and customization isn't done through an application at distance, but actually can be done by talking to people and engaged in making things. And we might see more things like this and less, let's say things that are cheaper and more accessible. So this is why, the notion of the fab cities is really important or something to consider, because once we start scaling up from fab labs and we start thinking about the next generation being actively involved in making, we need to, as manufacturers, as makers, as people who turn material into things, we have responsibility, because once we put those things in the world, we've made those choices. So that's my bit.
Thanks, James. Oh, it does sound loud. Hello, I'm Nat. One of the jobs I do at the moment is, for the last 6 weeks, I've been director of an East London makerspace called Machines Room. We're part of the Fab Lab network. We're part of Liz's Open Workshop network. We're part of the Maker Library network. And we try to operate as open door policy as we possibly can, although this morning's challenge to that was very interesting. So, small bit about me. I used to so I'm a designer and I've always been interested in technology. I ran a design company called Airside for 13 years, 15, how long? 14 years according to that. You can see in 1998 we wore very bad sandals. Really, really sad. And our footwear got slightly better by 2012. But what was interesting about Airside that I think has ended up why I've ended up in the maker culture now is that we tried to design a kind of utopian vision for how we could work, and the work that we created where no one was ever held back. All the jobs I'd had up until 1998, someone had tried to oppress me, to put me in a box, to label me. And so we tried to create this very kind of utopian world where if someone wanted to do something, they could do it, and it didn't matter whether they'd studied philosophy or illustration or they hadn't been to university. It was all about what people wanted to do. And it kind of worked. It was really good fun. That was the core team towards the end. We're quite a small core team with a wider freelance pool. And our work also, I'm a great believer in the ability of design. We were talking about accessibility a lot this morning, and we always tried to make our work. So we were one of the first digital agencies in London, so we were working a lot on websites and CD-ROMs and that kind of thing. And we always tried to make our work as accessible as possible. Other people were making it very technical, and we were like, no, I want my mum to understand it, I want my niece to understand it. And I think that in the early days of the maker movement, when I looked at the Fab Lab Manchester website 2 or 3 years ago, I looked at it and I thought, oh, it's for really techie blokes and it doesn't feel like it's for me. And I think you can use design to make things seem more accessible. There's some very early digital work of ours. You can see we kind of got into very cute characters in order to tell stories. We made stuff. We graduated to slightly more grown-up projects. That's the current Virgin in-flight entertainment system. Again, super easy to use. You could use it if you've had 4 gin and tonics and you can't quite move your finger, or whether you're a young child. But towards the end of the Airside years, I started getting much more interested in the use of design and technology to change the world. This is a fantastic project that's still going, which is about connecting people in remote parts of the world who don't have the internet using very, very basic technology. And it's actually really positively changing lives. And this quote from Bruce Mao made me just want to shift completely from making stuff to asking much bigger questions about the world. So he says, what if we looked at the world like a design project? How might we begin to make it better? And I think that's a lot of what we've been talking about today. Phoenix said earlier, she was talking about the fundamental drive to improve life versus the fundamental drive to profit from life, and I think that's really key. And so I just kind of, I could feel the change, and then I made that leap. If just a few years ago, I suppose, after a long period of a little bit of change, and I ended up working at the organisation called the RSA, the Royal Society of Arts, for a few years on a project called the Great Recovery, where we were looking at the circular economy. So Thomas mentioned the circular economy, and from a Fab City point of view, if I understand it right, Thomas, it means that in a normal city, you have stuff going into a city and you have rubbish going out. So you have stuff imported from China and then you have rubbish going out, and that's the linear economy. And the Great Recovery was all about trying to, it's still going, was all about trying to help designers very specifically at that point, because Sophie and I, who started the project, came from a design background, and we were thinking, well, designers make stuff, but in this context, makers make stuff. And this whole project is about how you move to much more like a Fab City model, which is you have materials go into the city and then stay in the city, being made and manufactured and remade and fixed and repaired. And as part of the project, we took people around the country, and we took people who were making things to where the stuff ends up, which of course is a bit like, it's very revelatory. It seems really simple. You think you know it, and then when you're actually there looking at the TV that you designed on the rubbish pile, or the toothbrush that you designed still on a beach somewhere after 5 years, it's really salutary, and it really changes things. And the other thing that really changes things is when you get designers and makers to take things apart. And actually, I was involved as part of the Great Recovery in setting up Fab Lab London near Bank, and the Great Recovery is part of that Fab Lab, and the taking apart is very much part of the beginning of making in the culture of that Fab Lab, which is very interesting, because if as part of someone's induction process into a Fab Lab, you say, well, before you make anything, let's unmake a few things, it just gets you in the mindset of understanding the implications of actually making new products. So what I'm going to do just very quickly before we go into today's exercise is look at a model that we developed as part of the Great Recovery. And I think that designing environmental sustainability is a really, really hard thing to understand. mostly because people haven't been taught it from very young. And what we're talking about today is to start teaching people very young in very simple language. So people make mistakes all the time. So there's a classic Philippe Starck chair that we read about on Dezeen in the early years of the Great Recovery, and it says, Philippe Starck has designed the most environmentally friendly chair. He's taken sawdust sweepings from the furniture workshop, and he's mixed it with plastic resin to make this chair. And actually, in circular economy terms, that makes absolutely no sense, because you're not thinking about the life cycle of that object. When that chair has broken or reached the end of its life, the only thing you can do is put it in landfill, because it won't degrade and you can't take it apart. So learning to think in systems is really, really, really important. And this is a little diagram, I'm going to break it down, that we developed. And it breaks down to 4 models for how to design for a circular economy, or how to design for a Fab City scenario. And the first circle, the innermost circle, is the most important. It's the most powerful, and it's also the one that in recent years we've moved most away from, but the one that the maker movement is kind of reclaiming. It's designed for longevity, for making things last a long time. It's the opposite of planned obsolescence. So in the old days, everything lasted a long time. You'd buy a garden spade, you'd expect it to last your entire life. Now you expect it to last a few years, and you buy another one on Amazon and it comes the next day. But the maker movement embraces fix and repair. Conspicuous fixing, I think, is very interesting. So we've got Kintsugi, wool fillers and Sugru there. But I think one of the most interesting parts of the inner circle of designing for longevity is open design, or the potential of open design. So these are open desk products, open desk being an open design platform for where you can share files. And in Machines Room the other day, so it's interesting, so I attend quite a lot of this kind of theoretical group, and you talk about how things might work in the future, and then actually seeing it in practice the other day was really interesting. So there was a woman who lived in Islington. She was getting some new furniture for her house. Okay, so she could have gone to IKEA, and she could have bought 3 stools and a lamp in IKEA. But instead, I've got no idea actually how she found out about this. I think I asked her and she said, a friend told her to look at OpenDesk. So she went on the OpenDesk website. She found some she found some designs from people in other parts of the world who designed this furniture. She downloaded the files, she looked at them, she thought, well, actually, maybe I want the stool a bit higher, or maybe I want the lamp a bit shorter, so she can amend them. Then she found someone to help her get them made, so she came to us, and she came and we worked with her, and we used our large CNC router to effectively print out these files. She used our workshop to finish them off, to customize them, to make them very much hers, and she took them home in her car. Now, the fundamental difference between her making those things, which, by the way, I think the lamp cost £80 and the stools were £40 or £50 each. So not completely out of the ballpark from the IKEA pricing. But let's say she moves house in 3 years' time and the leg falls off her IKEA stool, she'll just trash it. If the leg falls off one of those stools, she'll think, I made that stool, I was part of making that stool. You have a completely different emotional connection. So she'd fix it, she'd repair it, she'd bring it back to us, she'd give it to somebody else. And so I think that new concept, if that takes off, is a really, really exciting prospect. And it was very good to actually see it in action. So the next circle out is, it's wrongly labelled on this diagram. There you go. The next just shows I should have looked at my slides before. It's actually service design. So the advent of the internet and real-time communication and all our digital connection means that we can design for service now. It's dematerialization. So I don't own a car because I live in London and there's a Zip car service, which means that they've designed for trust. I trust that I can always get a car when I need one. I can go on my phone, find the nearest car to me, rent it for half an hour to a couple of days, and overall, it's a win-win-win situation. There's something like 9 fewer cars on the road because I'm doing that, and I don't have the annoyance when someone breaks my window or steals my car or all the other things that people do to cars in London. And from a maker point of view, that's a complete change in business model. But it's a massive opportunity as well, because in terms of the radical things you can do, it's a massive opportunity. So I'm just realised I'm slightly going over time, so I'm going to speed up slightly. But this is an example of a light bulb that is designed for service design. So it's designed by a company called Agency of Design. And essentially, by designing this light bulb, if you search for it online, there's a really nice film about it. Essentially, what they're doing by designing this light bulb is designing something that you can take apart and that the company will take back the really key valuable parts and reprocess them. So this light bulb never goes to landfill. It never goes to the bin. It goes back to the company who leased it to you, and effectively you're not buying a light bulb, you're leasing light, which is what Rolls-Royce do with their engines. The next circle out is designed for remanufacture, which again, the cost of remanufacturing mobile phones could be reduced by 50% if the industry made phones that were easier to take apart and offered incentives to take back phones. And then the last one is design for disassembly. And design for disassembly just means thinking about what happens to the object at the end of its life. Is someone going to have to take a hammer to it? Is there a nice easy release catch? Where are the valuable parts in it? Actually, what should happen to this object at the end of its life? So I think this diagram, if you can get to grips with it, and we've run workshops with it where we help people really understand the depth and complexity of it, if you can really get your head into it, it really helps understand all the things that you have to think about. And then when things move on and materials change and conditions change, you can just rethink what you need to do. I'm going to skip through the next slide. So what we're going to do now is, this is my niece Maya. So Maya, this is a bad photo taken on my phone of us down a Derbyshire mine, and she's making rope. It's a fantastic process, actually. It was amazing. It's just a kind of visitor centre thing, but she's making rope with in this kind of like mile-long handle. So she really likes making things. She's at school. She's just started secondary school. She likes 3D printing. She likes making stuff. This workshop, this next session that we're about to go into, is really asking the question, what do we need to say to someone like Maya tomorrow about how we get to next, how we get to the Fab City scenario, how we make things and design things better? Are there some very, very, very simple principles that need to be embedded in everybody in the next generation? Can we manage to do that? I'm going to hand over to James now.